Gather, gather, come around if you want to hear a story that I learned far off in a dark forest in the even darker halls of an old and weathered chapel. What it is about? Now, patience, my dear friends. A good story wants to be told with care, not haste. Now, let me take a sip first. I once stumbled upon said chapel in the dark woods far from any civilization in Ashfield. I can't recall what led me into those God-forsaken parts of the world. Well, it wasn't God-forsaken. After all, there stood a small chapel. In fact, once there stood a whole village there, bristling with life. Now there is only dense forest, except for one clearing. And in that clearing there stands this chapel, small, looking like it will collapse any second, but defiant yet, like the heroes that once gave their lives there. This chapel is guarded by one lone monk, a fellow named Killian. He is a kind man, young and calm, but I saw it, a light behind his eyes, the same excitement about his good story that drove me to wander all lanes known to us. And he didn't disappoint me in that regard, for he told me a story, a lesson, a legend even, that till my parting day I shall not forget. Once, many lifetimes ago, there stood this village. No one remembers its name, but he remembered the names of the heroes that were stationed there. Roderick, a warden, was the leader of the little company. Compassionate and kind-hearted and brave, he led them with conviction and valor. Melissa, another warden and twin sister to Roderick, was the second in command. She was calm and calculating, but no less compassionate than her brother, and together they fought like a blade forged from the same iron. Maria and Elisa, mother and daughter, sworn peacekeeper and keeper of secrets, one weathered and marked by many battles, the other fresh and eager to prove her worth. Mother Kalia, a priestess and member of the order that is now known as the Black Friar, yet back then they still dwelled in the light. 3 conquerors, Palia, Grim, and Comus, also joined them. All 3 had committed heinous crimes, and all 3 were conscripted. Palia was the most compassionate and level-headed. Grim never talked, but his actions screamed louder than any mouth could. And Comus was like a wildfire, brash and explosive, with a short temper. Their warden, a lawbringer named Godric, saw their potential, but also their danger. So he remained ever vigilant of them and everything around the village. And lastly, they had one of the unlikeliest allies a knight in those days could think about. Large and with broad shoulders stood Gudlaug, a raider of the Viking clans of the icy north, his giant Dane axe in hand. Why a Viking would join a company of knights? You see, my friend, Gudlaug had participated in many raids into Ashfield territory, and piece by piece he found a new and better way of life, at least in his eyes. Yes, indeed, my child, he found the preachings of God. Roderick, ever the man with an open heart, took him in and gave him the chance to prove himself. And the day soon should come where each and every one of them would have to prove their worth in the eyes of heaven. For a test lay ahead of them many of today's warriors would never be worthy of. for a darkness rose in the west, a great heathen horde, set on conquering and plundering. Wilds and savages all of them were, even more so than the brutal Vikings in Valkenheim. And they came, unstoppable like the great cataclysm itself, and they would have been even more devastating. They arrived on the day of the Lord. It was a sunny day, and all of our heroes were getting ready for their prayers, led by Mother Kalia, as the screams of women, men, and children tore through the silent hall of the chapel. There was terror and fear, yes, but the loudest ones were those of death. A shriek so unbelievably terrifying it freezes the blood of all lesser men, peasant or royalty alike. And yet our heroes did not waver. The first one at the chapel's gates was Comus. He swung them open, and all the village that could walk flooded in, parting in front of him like a river around a stone. And he turned around to his comrades, a wild grin on his face. At first they feared that he had betrayed them, for they all saw him as the most likely to do so, but as he opened his mouth, all doubts were erased from their minds. "Do your fucking duty, mother. Today we die." Mother Kalia nodded and then ordered Gudlaug to kneel. Then she took a bowl of sacred water, splashed it over his head, and made a sign of the cross in front of him. "Gudlaug, son of the North, I hereby baptize you in the name of the Lord. You shall be held by no oath than the one you lay down with yourself, nor shall any battle you fight in the name of the Lord ever tarnish your name in his eyes. Henceforth you shall carry the name Michael." The Viking kneeled there, his hair wet and in long strands, disbelief in his eyes. He now, after so long a time, truly was a warrior and servant of the one he found to be more forgiving and even more just than his old gods. With a new and even stronger conviction, he gripped his long shaft of his mighty axe, and his low and grutty voice boomed through the halls, wrapping all the village folks into a sense of safety. "Let them come, for we will send them back to the hells they came from." Comus's grin grew even wilder, and he raised his shield to the sky. With a hiss he declared, "You better watch this, you old fool up there. We will give you the show you so desperately want." And with a wild howl he charged out of the chapel's gates and into the ranks of the heathens. They all heard armor and bones break as Comus broke through the line and swung his flail in big arcs, ending the life of countless enemies with each strike. Palia and Grim followed him, forming a shield wall to defend the gates to the chapel. Maria and Elisa stood behind them, dispatching enemies with their small crossbows. But seeing Comus charge into battle, a war cry on his crazy, contorted face fell in enemy after enemy, created a rush in Elisa, and she couldn't contain it. And so she rushed out after him, seeking glory and proof of her skill. And as the heathens charged her, she buried her dagger in the chest of one, and her sword in the throat of a second, before an axe buried itself into her forehead, and she slumped to the ground, dead on the spot. And as soon as her fate became clear to those of our heroes in the chapel, a shriek filled the hall, a shriek that found its brethren in those of a banshee in its intensity and pitch. And Maria, before a stoic and steadfast woman, now knelt behind the shields of Palia and Grim, tears streaming down her face, her once soft eyes now crazy with despair. Gillian told me that in the quietest of nights he could still hear her scream, cold and distant, but each time his very heart would tear up, for he knows of its meaning. Maria, driven crazy with grief and rage, jumped out from behind the shield wall. Her movements, once graceful and controlled, were now rigid and wild, driven by pure power and brutality. Nothing of the beauty she once fought with was alive anymore, for it died with her daughter. For a brief moment, Roderick thought she would die as fast as her daughter, for her aura wasn't known for open battle. But to his and everyone else's surprise, her wild fury, her fighting with the conviction of someone who has nothing left to lose, turned the tide. She carved a red path, as Como said before, and her daughter tried too. They were a wild duo. The wild criminal and the broken mother painted the paths crimson and composed a distorted song with screams of injury and death. For the slimmest of moments they thought this cacophony would secure them the win, but then a spear struck Maria's midsection, getting driven all the way through by its wielder. The beastkeeper, once graceful and a pillar of beauty, now spit blood like a fountain before collapsing, her dying eyes looking for the corpse of the person she fought so fiercely for. And with her death, all hell broke loose. Driven back by the sheer mass of opponents, Como stripped over Maria's lifeless body. He tried to get up, yet before he could, dozens of feet trampled him to the ground, nearly leveling his outline with the mud that was forming from blood and dirt mixing. The cries of war the enemy let out paralyzed the villagers so that they even stopped whimpering and crying. A lump formed in Roderick's heart, and for the briefest of moments he despaired, but a wave of enemies crashing against Palia and Grimm's shields snapped him back. He couldn't allow himself to fall into despair. "Mother, help them! You there, come here!" A big and stout villager came to him, fear in his eyes. Roderick pressed his armored fist against the man's chest. "Strength now, brother. Take this and lead them to the city. Take the small door next to the shrine. Lead them to safety." And he pressed his own blade, crowned with green and golden colors, and a curved tip in the hands of the man. Holding the weapon of a man of this courage and valor, infused the villager with the same virtues, and like a guardian he would lead the village to town, warn them, and like this prevent the savages from ever advancing further into Ashfeldian lands. This man, Gillian told me, was his ancestor. Roderick grabbed a normal blade from one of the benches and made his way to his sister. "Ready to meet our lord?" He felt a grim smile through her helmet. "Yes, and while we are at it, let's give them hell." They turned just in time to see Godric fall, an arrow in one of the holes of his helmet that allowed him to see. He had slain enemies with his poleaxe from behind the shield wall until a well-aimed projectile found its mark, and the clang of his heavy armor was so loud in Roderick's ears that he thought he would go deaf. Melissa and Roderick charged to the support of the shield wall, but they came too late, as Palia fell, clutching her hands around a gushing wound in her throat, trying to keep the precious red fluid that led her life inside of her body. With a primal roar, Melissa and Roderick stormed through the new hole in the wall and carved yet another red carpet on the ground. They hacked and slashed and stabbed and pummeled, but behind them the last strength of the shield fainted. Grim's legs gave out under him, and the enemy trampled over him to get behind the barricade of wood and steel and flesh. He died to a blade to his neck, severing his head cleanly from his shoulders. Mother Kalia, still the words of the holy script on her lips, was overwhelmed and stabbed to death shortly after, daggers finding weak points in her guard, biting flesh and draining life. Roderick and Melissa still fought with ferocity, slaying heathen after heathen after heathen, but as fate or the Lord would have it, a misguided parry by Melissa led to Roderick feeling the bite of a blade first in his calf and then in his throat. He gurgled and fought for air, but there was none to get, for his throat was opened. Melissa, now the last of the knights who fought, now with tears in her eyes and despair in her chest, until a spear hit her chest and an axe found a way to her throat. Till this day, no one can decide what struck first. Now the last and newest warrior the Lord above stood in the chapel. Michael, formerly known as Gudlaung, now brandished his large axe at the charging enemies with a voice as strong as stone. Nu mun þú, fína fyrir reiður, samra stríðsmanns. With this roar he charged the enemy, and he pushed them back to the gates, his giant axe cleaving limbs and bodies and heads, cutting organs and armor alike, until he had regained the gate to the chapel. At this the heathens pulled back. Michael let them hear a mighty shout that instilled fear in every one of the footmen of the enemy, and with this they unleashed a hail of arrows to stop him, and though many of the death's hornets found their target true, he still stood and roared, his hands and axe raised to the heavens. So they shot again, and again he continued to shout. So they shot a third wave, and again the arrows struck through, and yet again Michael didn't fall. He lowered his hands, grabbed his axe with the strength that nearly splintered the shaft, and glared at them like the devil himself. And in this fashion a fourth and fifth wave of wooden hornets was sent to meet him, and each time more than enough found the target, but each time the warrior with the name of an angel stood stoic and strong. Only as some of the enemy conjured enough courage to near him, they found that he had died standing upright, like a true son of the north, yet painted with a cross of the Lord across his face. And this, my dear friends, is the story of the 10 of the chapel. A story about devotion, conviction, and strength.